"How much did your mother leave you?" Larry asked bluntly, moments after the funeral. I was stunned by his lack of sympathy and directness. He probably assumed the inheritance was already in my account since he noticed me with the bank book, but he was wrong on both counts, factually and morally. "About $2 million, I replied. $2 million, that's all?" Larry responded with a smirk that made me uneasy. Even after taxes, there should be a significant amount remaining. I found his reaction unsettling. His unpleasant grin made me uncomfortable, and although I wasn't sure what he was plotting, I was confident that things wouldn't go his way. The following day, Larry wasted no time putting his scheme into action, but his short-sightedness was bound to be his downfall, though he wasn't aware of it yet. My name is Sarah Taylor. At 19, I was thrust into an arranged marriage with Larry, an employee at a company. He is 3 years my senior and the eldest son of the Owen family. Despite being the oldest, his younger brother Frank left home after college and cut off all contact. Consequently, Larry was treated like an only child and was doted upon by my in-laws. Truthfully, I never wanted to marry Larry, but my mother came from a family with a long-standing business tradition. I was in no position to defy my parents' decisions, so I found myself wed to Larry. He couldn't refuse the marriage either, as his father was also entrenched in the business world. Our marriage lacked love and was far from happy. Sadly, we were unable to have children. Marrying so young, it was difficult to accept our inability to conceive, and I had hoped that having a child would improve our relationship. However, despite numerous hospital visits, it never came to be. "Hey, you barren woman, are the chores done?" After a few years of being treated kindly by my parents-in-law in my youth, they started calling me that. "You should be able to make it happen if you just do what you're supposed to do. It's a waste of money going to the hospital," my father-in-law would say, hurling hurtful remarks at me daily. Larry never stood up for me. When I was scolded by his parents, he'd either read the newspaper or nap, snoring away. When I wanted a change and expressed interest in working, he objected, saying, "If you go to work, people will think we're not doing well," and wouldn't let me leave the house. Back then, it was common for women to become homemakers after marriage. However, living with just my mother-in-law was honestly a nightmare every day. No one offered assistance. I couldn't burden my parents with my troubles, and escaping wasn't an option due to our marriage being tied to our jobs. Despite this, I clung to hope that one day my efforts would be rewarded and endured each day with desperation. However, no matter how many years passed, the situation never improved. 19 years after our marriage, when I turned 43, my father-in-law died in an accident. This incident revealed that his company had been evading taxes. The back taxes and fines depleted our assets, and the company went bankrupt. Although we managed to hold on to the house, we had to relinquish our comfortable lifestyle. I had assumed it would be challenging for Larry, now 45, to find a new job, but my parents helped him secure one swiftly. However, my mother-in-law became increasingly withdrawn and aged rapidly. For a while, she lacked the energy to even utter hurtful remarks to me, which was a relief. Then she suffered a stroke and required constant care. At that point, I truly abandoned any hope of ever having a child. Despite being 43 and somewhat resigned to it, this event marked a definitive turning point. Larry, as if it were expected, shifted the responsibility of caring for his mother onto me. On his days off, he lounged around just like before. "Larry, I really wish you'd help with your mother's care sometimes," I mustered the courage to tell him one day. "Even if it's just on your days off or for one meal, it would mean a lot to me." Larry frowned and replied, "I'm working, you know. I need to rest on my days off." Larry just didn't seem to grasp it. After Larry's father's company went bankrupt, my parents began to worry about me. Eventually, they said, "Come back home. But what would happen to his mother if I left? We have a caregiver who comes once a week, but I couldn't imagine affording someone every day for this household. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to abandon her. It just wasn't in my nature to do so. Over time, Larry began leaving the house early, even on his days off, claiming he felt uneasy staying home and relaxing. Neighbors said he started complaining. "My wife won't let me relax at home on my days off." He began solo trips, while our neighbors knew his mother needed care. Despite this, he acted as if all caregiving duties fell solely on me, showing a disregard for how others perceived him. It was heartbreaking to witness his mother, who had always adored Larry, being neglected by him once she became ill. Sometimes she would lament, "It's because you're here that Larry won't come." When I responded, "Should I leave then?" she would quickly fall silent. This continued for another 19 years until the prolonged period of caregiving came to an end, with my mother-in-law passing away and reuniting with her husband. I was approaching 59 at that point. I had no affection left for Larry, but I had come to accept many things. Leaving didn't seem feasible, and it appeared likely that I would spend the remainder of my days in this house. Larry remained dedicated solely to his work, a quality that earned him recognition even after he reached retirement age. He was invited to stay on as senior staff, which has enabled me to live as I do now. We were never close as a couple, but I'm grateful for this arrangement. Our marriage was never strong, yet Larry never made any moves to force me out. Perhaps he believes it's too late for that now. He still prefers to be away from home on his days off, which has allowed me to cherish my solitude. I've recently taken up pottery as a hobby and made friends at this stage of life, finally finding joy since my marriage. However, Larry seemed bothered by this. "You're out playing while I'm working," he complained. One day, he even burned my pottery class bag in the yard. "What are you doing?" I asked angrily. "Don't waste time on strange hobbies. Just do the housework," he scolded. My pottery supplies and pouch were inside the bag, and even dousing it with water couldn't save it. It turned to ashes. I was livid. I had thought it was too late for change, but I still had a long life ahead. The thought of divorce crossed my mind, but just as I was considering it, another tragedy struck. My parents suddenly passed away. My father passed away suddenly due to an illness, and just a month after his funeral, my mother also fell ill and passed away. Everything unfolded so swiftly, and I was engulfed in grief. My brother Jack had already assumed control of my father's company, and with a large turnout at both funerals, I found myself bedridden for about a week afterward, likely due to mental exhaustion. Members from my pottery class kindly checked on me, but Larry taunted me, asking, "How long are you going to stay in bed?" He remarked, "I was tired after Mom's funeral too, but I didn't sleep that much. It must be nice to sleep all day without working." While his words may have held some truth, hearing them from a husband was deeply hurtful. The following day, I pushed myself to rise and resume my routine, realizing I could no longer afford the luxury of enjoying my hobbies. Life had pared down to essentials, yet Larry appeared content and indifferent to my feelings. Not long after my mother's funeral, I recalled the upcoming payment deadline to the funeral home and checked the bank book. Jack, preoccupied with work, had entrusted me with handling the payment. However, when Larry noticed me with the bank book, he approached with a smug grin. "So, how much did your mother leave behind?" he asked callously, stunning me with his insensitivity. He brought it up immediately after the funeral, showing no concern for my well-being. He must have assumed that the inheritance had been deposited because he saw me with the bank book, but such an assumption was unthinkable for any decent person. Monotonously, I replied, "About 2 million. "Only 2 million? He smirked unpleasantly. "Well, even after taxes, there should be hundreds of thousands left." His grin was contemptuous. I couldn't comprehend Larry's motives, but I knew things wouldn't go his way. Without uttering a word to him, I quietly stowed away the bank book following Larry's tactless comments. Suddenly, Larry spoke up, saying, "You've had a tough time. You should rest early today." It was unusual for Larry to offer kind words, but instead of comforting me, it left me feeling uneasy. Unable to bear being around him, I retired to bed early that day. However, the next day brought an unexpected turn of events. After breakfast, Larry left for work as usual, but I soon received a call informing me that he hadn't shown up. This was unprecedented, and I feared he might have been in an accident. Frantically, I tried calling Larry, but couldn't reach him. Anxiously pacing around, I entered the living room and instantly understood. On the coffee table lay a document, a divorce form already filled out by Larry. Seeing it, I thought, "No way," and checked where I had kept the bank book the previous day. As expected, the bank book was missing. "Unbelievable," I murmured to myself. It wasn't an accident. Larry had clearly vanished intentionally. I had sensed something fishy that morning in the living room. By taking those items, he must have been plotting to start a new life without me. Larry hadn't forced me out earlier because he was awaiting my parents' inheritance. The missing bank book provided damning evidence. Despite this realization, I remained composed. There was no need to panic. Methodically, I completed the divorce paperwork and submitted it to the city office. Larry had set himself up for failure. I resolved that he needed to comprehend it was too late for regrets. I contacted Larry's workplace formally and explained, "I haven't been able to reach him either, but it doesn't seem accidental. I'll update you once I have any information. Apologies for the inconvenience." His employer agreed to consider it a paid leave day and extended their good wishes, which left me feeling a pang of envy for Larry's fortunate work environment. After all, it was a company introduced by my parents. I hoped he would show gratitude to his employer. Larry was becoming increasingly unfamiliar to me. After enduring so much, I successfully filed for divorce. I was surprised by how quickly I felt liberated. I wondered if my life might have been different had I ended things sooner. As I packed my belongings, my phone rang. It was Larry, who had ignored my calls earlier. Anticipating his words, I ignored the call and continued packing. The phone persisted, as did the house phone. Annoyed, I reluctantly decided to answer. "Hello," I said casually. As expected, Larry sounded panicked on the other end. "I called earlier because I heard you didn't go to work. You need to contact your workplace immediately," I said. "That's not the issue right now," he began to say, shouting, "I can't get the money." Hearing his desperation, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. He finally noticed, huh? I guess he didn't realize it because he hastily took the bank book. "Your ID number," Larry exclaimed. "Do you remember it?" "No, don't you remember? It was in the bag for my pottery class," I replied, still laughing. Larry sounded anxious. "Is this ID expired?" he asked urgently. "I wouldn't know. After your mother passed away, I repeatedly asked you to handle the paperwork. I went to the bank to sort it out, but they said it couldn't be done because I wasn't the rightful heir. So, the bank book remained untouched, with just a few dollars left," I said. "Don't play games," he continued. "You need to sort out matters for someone who's no longer here. You kept saying you'd take care of it eventually, so keep that promise. Don't blame me." Feeling impatient, I listened quietly as Larry continued to complain. I didn't feel like responding and remained silent. Larry appeared to have gone back to the bank, discussing the issue with the burned ID. "Can't something be done, maybe through a proxy?" he pleaded. I could hear the concerned voice of the teller on speakerphone as Larry added, "I'm on the phone with my wife right now." Listening to him, I interrupted. "Larry, what are you talking about? You know you can't do anything like that as a stranger, right?" "Huh," Larry muttered, clearly flustered. The divorce papers have been processed correctly just now. Thank you for being prepared. Goodbye, I said firmly, ending the call. I knew the bank teller had heard my final words. By now, Larry must have been either pale with shock or flushed with anger. Just imagining his reaction made me chuckle. I realized I had to leave the house before he returned. With that in mind, I swiftly packed my things and headed to my family's old home, which had been vacant since my parents passed away. I inherited my family's ancestral home, along with my mother's assets from her business, totaling $15 million. However, inheriting such a substantial amount of money posed risks, especially without children to consider. Therefore, I opted to receive just enough to live comfortably, approximately $2 million. The remainder included the family estate, my mother's impeccably preserved wardrobe, and my father's valuable antiques, which held significant appraisal potential. My brother Jack, who had moved out upon marriage and assumed control of the business, agreed to this arrangement. He shared concerns about the vacant family home and welcomed the cash inheritance. We concluded our inheritance discussions amicably. After arriving at the family home, I informed Jack of my divorce from Larry and my intention to live there. He responded, "If you're moving into the family home, it won't be empty," which was comforting to hear. Then he asked, "But are you sure about divorcing Larry, Sarah?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "We don't have children, and both our parents have passed away. If we both want a divorce, then it's the right decision. I want to start anew, and I have no regrets." Jack expressed concern about me living alone, but I assured him that remaining in a lifelong servitude to Larry would have been worse. Moreover, spending my remaining years in a home filled with memories of our family, even if alone, would bring me happiness. Larry continued to call me multiple times afterward, but he never anticipated that I would be at the family home and never visited. That day, I spent it alone in peace. The house felt empty without a family, yet I felt a deep sense of relief. The following day, I mustered the energy to go and make a deposit. Retrieving the bank book from Larry was a bit of a hassle. I decided to go around 5 a.m., assuming Larry would be asleep. When I returned home and opened the front door, the smell of alcohol hit me. "Are you kidding me?" I couldn't help but grimace at the strong odor. Entering the living room, I found beer cans strewn about. My bank book lay torn and abandoned on the table. "This is awful," I thought to myself. Ripping apart someone's bank book like this, no matter how upset you are, is just wrong. I gathered the torn pieces of the bank book and stashed them in my bag along with a few clothes before returning to my family home. From there, I headed to the bank. As I approached the entrance, someone called out, "Sarah." It was Larry. He had been waiting for me. He must have noticed the bank book was missing, so I figured he anticipated my visit. "What are you doing here now?" he asked with a scoff. "Whether I come here or not is none of your business," I said firmly. "Don't say that. We've been together for so long," he replied, ignoring the finalized divorce. I brushed past him and entered the bank. Larry persisted in trying to talk to me, but I steadfastly ignored him. That's when it happened. "Brother, isn't that Sarah?" someone called out. It was Frank. "Why are you here?" Larry asked as Frank approached us. Larry and I were both surprised to see him. We hardly ever saw Frank, usually only at funerals. It had been about 43 years since I married Larry, and this was probably the third time I had met Frank. He had wanted to cut ties with the family, but his parents, concerned about their company's reputation, had persuaded him to at least show up for important family events. Since we had met at my mother-in-law's funeral a few years ago, he probably recognized us. "Ah, I'm here to handle Mom's estate. Thought I'd check the balance and keep you updated," Frank mentioned. Larry's eyes brightened, and I found myself equally surprised. I had believed there were only a few dollars left in the bank account. However, Frank revealed there were also investment trusts established long ago and safe deposit boxes rented during our father's lifetime. Frank had learned about these from our mother before her passing. She had instructed him, "If anything happens, you take charge." However, due to his busy schedule, he had only recently found the time to act. Frank glanced apologetically at both Larry and me. There was a letter in the safe deposit box, along with some jewelry. Mom stated that all her assets should go to Sarah. Frank's words surprised me, but Larry appeared even more stunned. He took a letter from his documents, its stationery familiar to me, as I had bought it for my mother-in-law. The letter explicitly stated that all the jewelry in the safety deposit box and other assets were to be inherited by me, her daughter-in-law, Sarah. I could vividly imagine my mother-in-law carefully composing it. I recalled offering her the stationery once, but she had coldly rebuffed me, saying, "It's not for you." Perhaps she had intended to write this letter back then. I gasped in surprise. "Sarah, you've been managing everything yourself, haven't you?" Frank remarked. Despite my mother-in-law's harsh words, she expressed remorse and entrusted me with handling her estate. She knew that if Larry found out, he might attempt to keep it quiet. Beside me, Larry's face flushed red, and he began to tremble. "Well, I never expected to handle any inheritance, but as the legal heir, I figured I should take care of it. It's just a matter of changing the name to Sarah, so that shouldn't be an issue for you, right, Larry?" Frank remarked casually, unaware of our divorce. Later, I was called up to the bank counter. Larry sat listlessly in the lobby, seemingly without purpose. That day, I completed the issuance of the bank book and arranged the transfer for the funeral home. "I'll be heading off now, Sarah. I'll be in touch," Frank said, leaving Larry and me at the bank. After safely returning home, Frank contacted me to explain that Larry had initially contested the validity of the letter. However, Frank managed to stop him by emphasizing, "We should honor Mom's wishes." Despite his efforts, Larry sought free legal advice from a lawyer. Although the letter didn't constitute a formal will, the lawyer advised that resolving the matter through negotiation would be more cost-effective than litigation. Larry eventually agreed to take back his claim on the investment trusts, which held little value, and reluctantly accepted inheriting the house. Finally, I formally received my mother-in-law's estate. Larry argued with the lawyer, saying, "If Sarah gets Mom's estate, I should receive something too, right?" However, this was a separate issue. It became awkward. Even the lawyer scolded him. Larry eventually found me at the family home and appeared at my doorstep. "I was wrong. Can we start over?" he pleaded, realizing he had lost his claim. He knelt, begging for forgiveness. "Start over? There was never any love between us. What's left to begin again?" For the first time, I expressed my true feelings to Larry. He fell silent, seeming to regret his actions. I couldn't help but smile. "At least you still have the house, right? Have you sorted things out at work? If money is tight, you should work hard to keep your job." With that, I closed the door. It was finally settled. The bank book secured the assets left by our mothers, ensuring my comfort from now on. Meanwhile, Larry's continued absence from work, without notifying his employer, resulted in his dismissal, just as I had warned him. Perhaps his disappearance wasn't purely out of responsibility, but also to uphold his pride. Now, without an audience for his dignity and missing the easy fortune he expected, it wouldn't be surprising if he felt useless, lacking purpose. Though I couldn't help but feel concerned for someone I had spent so many years with, that was where my involvement ended. I had no intention of extending a helping hand. "I truly apologize for the trouble caused to you, Sarah. It's really regrettable," Frank said sincerely. He was the only one who offered apologies and assured me that I no longer needed to deal with Larry. Recognizing the family's issues early on, Frank had left home at a young age and was likely leading a contented life now. far removed from the household drama. Larry had become withdrawn, but with his pension, he could manage. His attempt at reconciliation showed some courage, but he needed to embark on his own path to truly start anew. Returning to pottery classes brought me joy, and my friends warmly welcomed me back. I hadn't realized how fulfilling it could be to devote time solely to myself at the pottery studio. I've even met someone wonderful. Though I had sworn off marriage, being with someone who loves me might also bring happiness, rather than being alone forever. Perhaps embracing new beginnings could be better. It might feel too late, but just like with the divorce, it's never too late as long as you're alive. Anyone can find happiness, no matter their age. I truly believe that.